get right into it and get to the demo portion of this. Again, so I'm from Seekr, and today I want to talk about our AI-ready data engine. Essentially, it's our platform, our end-to-end AI platform, where you can transform your unstructured data into structured data, then subsequently AI-ready data, fine-tune a model, and deploy that model. Really, I think the compelling thing about this platform is how quickly you can do this. And while there are lots of different personas out there, we offer a UI, an SDK, an API to meet any of the needs of those personas. Today, I'm going to walk through a bit of a UI example, but first, I'll just sort of kind of tee up what we're going to talk through today. I think there's a lot of experience on this call, so I won't belabor these points too much, but I think we all know that notoriously regulatory data, or really any type of unstructured data, coming from PDFs, reports, consumer complaints, any type of data sets that your enterprises are using today, it could be very unwieldy. And there's lots of tools out there to kind of help out with this, but I don't think that there's really very many end-to-end tools that kind of take this to the next level. So what we're going to talk about is the automation of the data set preparation. So basically, your data scientists are not having to spend months just cleaning the data and getting it into a structured form in order to do any fine-tuning of your model, instruction fine-tuning in this case. So when we get to the demo, I'll go through some AARP data, and we'll just kind of walk through how that has taken place. This is the 10,000-foot view of our AI-ready data engine. A couple of things I'll point out. I know we've seen images like this a lot. On the left-hand side, you have your inputs. On the right-hand side, you have your outputs. But to get a little bit more granular on this, on the left, we have your messy unstructured data. It could be PDFs, audio transcripts, logs, video, any of the type of data sets that enterprises are working with today. Within the middle, we have what's called the AI-ready data engine. So a couple of things are happening in here. It's not really the intent of this demo to go through extreme detail, like step by step, but I can kind of give you a high level. Essentially, what you're doing is you're providing your raw data. It can be of any type, and it can be multiple data sets. That data is then going to be structured based on Q&A pairs. So really think about the purpose of this particular demo here is getting your data ready for conversation. So there's different things that we have to consider when it comes to conversation with your data. You want to have, obviously, clear, concise responses. You want it to be based on, ground truth, and you want it to be conversational in nature. So we do have this QA generation, and then subsequently we do use LLM as a judge in the background. So what we are doing is generating more and more QA data, and then we are putting that through a judge to determine, is this something that we see as being valuable for fine-tuning a model? And if not, it's going to continue to iterate. So what you'll hear me talk about in a lot of ways is an agentic workflow that supports the creation of this data. It's not just structuring your QA data. It's taking in your information, your corpus, and I'll provide you an example shortly, and generating QA data by synthesizing it down to recursive summarization, and then ultimately generating more data such that you can make a good impact on whatever model that you actually want to fine-tune. So this could be for any use case, but in today's, we'll talk about a chatbot. I've already mentioned, we handle any type of data, any domain-specific data. We're going to generate those QA pairs, and then we're going to result in a high-quality data set, and it's optimizing for fine-tuning of AI models. In this case, we're talking about instruction fine-tuning, not continued pre-training. So that's why we have to have labeled data. Just to kind of take a step back here, I know that I have seen in other platforms where, while you may have a robust ML ops platform and you may have great access to tools, you do not always have the ability to generate this type of data, in an autonomous fashion. Instead, it takes folks a very long amount of time, whether it's looking at historical data and having to clean that up, or potentially generating new data. So a little bit more in terms of why QA and A pairs make sense. So as I mentioned, LLMs, they need structured learning they need structured context to make sense of unstructured text. So that's where the Q&A pairs are going to come into play. So we provide clear questioning and corresponding answer based on whatever corpus of data that you provide. So those are Q&A pairs that we are generating. So as a result, we're going to help the AI identify, retrieve, and generate high-quality responses. That's via fine-tuning on those QA pairs. So here's an example that I provided. This is where you might provide some AARP data on long-term care trends. And so let's assume that this is not something that's already built into your foundation model, or at the very least, it's not built in such a way that you have this Q&A type of conversational behavior. So we take this long portion of the corpus, and we can kind of break that down into what's the most valuable information, or what's maybe one perspective on this information that would potentially be asked of the model by a user. So in this case, maybe it's how many people will need significant long-term care in their lifetime. Now, it's a very specific question on a big amount of data set. So, and then we would generate the response. So we would go through this for many records, and so not just one question. Obviously, you want to identify different perspectives, and you would also want to generate more Q&A pairs based on potentially the LLM as a judge as part of our process. So just to kind of back up, because I know we talked through a lot here, what we're talking about right now, and I'll go back to our visualization, is we take enterprise data in any form. You're able to load that into Seekr Flow, into our AI-ready data engine, either via the UI that we'll talk through, or via an SDK and the APIs that we provide that are well documented. We then generate QA pairs, and we also use an LLM as a judge methodology to generate additional QA pairs based on what we have already done. At that point, you now have what we consider an AI-ready data set on which you can actually fine-tune a model. So I'm going to go into the platform right now. If there's any questions while I transfer over, I'm happy to speak to it, or I can just continue on. And I'm not looking at chat, so if there's anything in chat.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is it text only, or how do you deal with PDFs that do the multiple, that have images or kind of highly formatted tables, etc.?
Yes, yeah, good question. So as of right now, we can ingest PDFs. We do not have images brought over in PDFs. That's on our roadmap, but we do bring in the structured tables from the PDF that you would upload.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, one question I have is we've seen a lot of companies as they start doing processes like that lowers the water, and then they find out they've got 15 versions of a document, 15 versions of truth. Do you run into that problem, or do you guys have ways around it, or is the customer got to clean it up before they start using your process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's, an interesting, I would almost say a philosophical question, right? So, we are, inherently relying on the data that's being provided by the customer in terms of it being ground truth. However, we do have, we'll say, fact-checked APIs that occur in our agentic process. That being said, that is going to be sort of the ground truth. And so, of course, we do rely on SMEs. I think, kind of sort of in that same vein, and maybe it's not exactly answering your question. If you have multiple versions, sometimes it might be multiple versions based on time dependency. So what we're talking about right now is, fine-tuning a model, instruction fine-tuning a model. However, we also are releasing our RAG workflow. So that way, if it's, data sets that are changing quickly, that might be more of, a process where you want to use potentially a combination of fine-tuning on some of your sort of institutional knowledge or your guidelines or stuff that's slowly changing. And then if there's anything that is maybe changing quickly, that's where you might use a vector store as part of our managed RAG solution to capture those changes over time.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Can you confirm that you're seeing Seekr Flow at this point?
We can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so this is the landing page. So at the top, we have a lot of our quick start areas. I guess one of the things that I'll point out is everything is going to be organized in terms of projects. So shortly, we'll talk through a project on, I don't have it at the very top, but an AARP project. I'll talk through the creation, but ultimately I want to show you that's kind of how you encapsulate everything. So any of the projects that you've worked on recently are going to show up here is the point. So after you fine tune a model, and again, we'll talk through that process, you do have a dashboard here showing all the different deployments that you have, if you have any that are active, pending, failed, or inactive. On the left-hand side is going to be most of your navigations, whether you're uploading a data set. That's for the purposes of generating that fine-tuning QA pairs. I mentioned the projects. Deployments are essentially what are the models that I have actually deployed, and there's an endpoint set up to interact with those models. Sandbox is a nice tool to show so you can interact with your model. You can do it via an API, but in terms of the UI, this would be where you would interact with the model and also do a comparison with foundation models or other fine-tuned models to determine if what you have generated is, or what you have, I guess the model outcomes are exactly what you would expect to see. We currently host a variety of flavors of the Llama as well as Mistral models. I believe we are working on DeepSeek models at this point. And this will, of course, continue to grow over time. But this is what we provide in terms of foundation models on which you to actually conduct any type of fine-tuning. So if I was to want to, and again, a lot of this stuff has already been pre-generated, but if I was kind of talking through the process of wanting to upload my data, you'll notice that there's various types in here of data sets that have already been uploaded. Markdown, PDFs, we can do docx, we can do JSON. And then what you see here are actually some Parquet files that are actually generated based on the data generation. These are the QA pairs. So from step one, let's say I had some documents that I wanted to upload. I can either do a drag and drop or browse. So in this case, I just pulled in this Consumer Financial Protection, Bureau narrative scrubbing standard. It's a PDF. It's going to load. It's going to convert, because ultimately what we need to have at the end of the day or before the generation of your fine-tuning data is a markdown file. So right now it's converting it into a markdown for me. In addition to that, as part of the process, what I want to do is include what are my fine-tuning goals. So in the case of the AARP chatbot that we're going to talk through, maybe it's some of the typical let's see, we'll be training a RP, something along those lines. Ultimately you want to give it that intent. There's various types of training that you can do in the Seekr platform today. There is what we're doing right now, this Q&A generation. We are also coming out with a process called a way of training a model for enhanced retrieval, and that aligns really well with our RAG solution that's coming out. With that, you would have training for essentially generating data sets for better retrieval of data, in the sense of being able to understand different distractor documents that might come from your RAG environment, from your vector store, and how to sort of filter those out. What are the Oracle documents? Basically, what are the right documents that we're bringing in, as well as a chain of thought. So showing that sequential step-by-step processing that your chatbot would go through, potentially doing multiple searches to your RAG environment. This is in line with some research that was done recently on retrieval augmented fine-tuning. So that would be our enhanced retrieval capability. So in that case, I would state here that I want to develop a Q&A or a fine-tuning data set for the purposes of enhanced retrieval. So at this point, it's uploaded. It has taken it and converted it into a markdown. I have what my fine-tuning goal was, and at that point, I would do my start data creation. So that'll run in the background, and as I said, at the very end of it, this would result in, I'm going back out of here, the generation of the Parquet file. It probably doesn't want to, I'll just duplicate. Okay, so now we're back in our data sets. You can see this data creation process is ongoing. I receive an email whenever it's done based on it knowing that it's associated with my account. So now let's say that I actually want to create a project where I want to use that data set to fine tune it. So we'll say this is the AARP demo. This can be anything you want. It doesn't really impact what's happening with the data creation. So I will create this project, and now from there, what I want to do is create a run. When I create a run, essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a fine-tuning job. So again, I would give it a name and description. It can be anything that you want. You'll be able to refer back to this. Here is where I would select from the Parquet files that are generated, because they'll post here once it's complete. This is the PDF that I uploaded. So you would expect to see QA pairs, Parquet. I would select that. And then I'll just select this one just for demonstration purposes. Then I can select the model that I want to train on. So let's say it's going to be the Meta Llama 3 8B Construct. When training, you have the option of using 1 instance or 8 instance. Right now, what we are processing on are Intel Gaudi 2s in the Intel Developer Cloud. So obviously, there will be cost implications here. So let's say that I just want to do 1 instance. Maybe it's a smaller model, a smaller data set. I can also tune hyperparameters based on the number of epochs I want, our batch size and learning rate. And so obviously we have some descriptions here, and we default to what we consider to be, at least in terms of learning rate, a good starting point there. It really depends on the data set that you're loading and which model you're training as to how you want to hypertune or how you want to configure these hyperparameters. So there's always best practices behind that. So what I now have is the data source that I'm going to fine tune the model on. I have all of my hardware, model, hyperparameters, and then I would start the run. Depending on the model, this can take anywhere from a couple minutes to maybe a couple of hours. But at that point, what you would be left with is if you would go into your model library. I'm sorry, no. I would then want to create a deployment actually. So for my project, let me go to my AARP demo. So let's say I already created the run. Now I want to create a deployment. I have already created a different, a different fine-tuned model. It's essentially the same process. So this is the base model Llama 8B Instruct. I'm using Intel Gaudi 2s. My hyperparameters were number of epochs 5, batch size 2, learning rate 1E-5. And then this is sort of the run details. So this is one that I had completely done already. If I go into this, we do provide a training loss that's captured over the number of epochs. So that way you can understand how you're converging. And if you have any concerns about that, clearly, generally speaking, you might want to iterate multiple times on these and tweak these over time. Luckily, it's a very easy UI, but also within the SDK, you would be able to do additional hyperparameters. These are just the ones that we show within the UI. Also, between the SDK, within the SDK, you would be able to track this training loss over time, and as well as develop custom metrics as you'd like. So this was a completed model. From here, we'll create our deployment. So I would create it from up here. I would name it, describe it. Let's assume I've already done that here, and it's this AAP long-term care. So at this point, I now have an active running deployment based on that fine-tuned model that I generated. And from there, again, I can interact with that model via the APIs that are provided, but in this case, I'm going to interact with it in this sandbox. So these are the current deployments that we have that are active, just various demos. So I'll select the AARP long-term care. And then I also want to do a comparison with the base model to see if it's doing any better than what Llama 3 8B provides. In this case, you can do things like update the temperature, top P, max tokens. You can even create a system prompt. But we'll start with just Model A, AARP long-term care. Model B is the foundation model. Yeah. I'm going to just copy some questions that I have over here. And remember, this was trained for the purposes of being a good chatbot. So when you think about what you want from a chatbot, you want it to have a conversational tone, you want it to be, grounded in truth, and you want it to be relatively, have some brevity and not be too verbose, which LLMs are very well known for. So in this case, does Medicare cover the cost of long-term care? We'll see how this returns. Looks like our model over here didn't run. Try this again. Like this model over here is not wanting to run for me. Let's go ahead and try it again. That's actually the foundation model, not our trained model. So I'm surprised to see that. So we're going to try that again. So Meta Llama 8.3b instruct. That's the 2. Try it again. Okay, there we go. I think last time I didn't choose the instruct model. So what you're seeing right now is, and again, based on the way the QA pairs were set up, that the AARP long-term care chatbot, we'll say, is much more verbose and kind of gets to the answer of the question very quickly, whereas the 8B instruct model, just foundationally, is very verbose. I'll provide another question here. In this case, we'll say, does Medicare cover car services at home? And once again, we're seeing that based on how we've set up the QA data, it's getting to the core of the question. It's being a little more succinct than you might have from the model. And then I'll do one more just for brevity here. Okay, so according to AARP surveys, how many people will need significant long care in their lifetime? So relatively close to what the instruct model is saying. It's saying it a little bit of a different way, 7 in 10 versus 70%. So we'll throw another one at them, see how that looks.
And Ben, I'm curious, what do you find impresses your prospects the most? Is it the GUI interface? Is it ability to save money on software engineers or data engineers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that from my perspective, it's really going to be the speed. Whether you're using the API, the APIs via the SDK or the UI, the ability with which I'm not having to set up any of the infrastructure here. I'm not having to create the data set for fine tuning. The thing I will point out is, we understand that there is lots of different personas out there. And so, I think that from my perspective, if I was using the product day to day, I would personally probably use the SDK a little bit more. That's just because of my background, but I can understand how having this UI is very beneficial to those that don't have that type of background to, write stuff with Python and kind of put together these systems in the background. But yeah, so I think really, getting time to iterate quickly is what I find to be the most compelling. And, being able to cut down on that time in order to generate these QA pairs. I think that there also is a lot of flexibility here within the UI that I haven't necessarily touched on. For instance, if I want to generate my own data set, maybe I do have that wherewithal, or maybe I already have some data generated. I still have the ability to put that into our data sets. So let's say I generated my own Parquet, and it was very specific to a use case that I might have. We've talked a lot about a chatbot, but another example that I might be able to walk through, maybe in another session is, the ability to generate a model that scrubs data for PII. So these use cases are much broader than I just want to be able to talk with my model. And that's kind of the nuances of what we're seeing here. But it might be developing a model that's really good at retrieval. It might be a model that's really good at summarization, or potentially even reasoning models or chain of thought models. The idea here is that being able to help a user generate a data set to meet whatever requirement that they have for a generative AI solution. So, it's sort of like this idea that we'll take in any data that you have, and we'll also generate data for any use case that you have. And really, it comes down to, what is the prompt that I'm providing as I'm creating the data set? And then also with our roadmap, we're coming out with more and more sort of flavors of synthetic or flavors of data generation for you to fine tune your model. So I would say that's probably the biggest point there. And ultimately, it's that you're able to upload any data, generate the data, fine tune your model, and deploy your model all end to end in one location.